Good evening to everyone who is here in person at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas Boyd School of Law. Good evening to our esteemed moderator and our expert panelists, and good evening to everybody who is joining us from across the Ninth Circuit virtually. My name is Johanna Hartwig, and I am the Executive Director of the Ninth Judicial Circuit Historical Society. And we are so pleased tonight to be collaborating with the Boyd School of Law to put on this panel, which is entitled Gambling, Navigating Emerging Issues in the Law. Now, when I say it, you can't quite see that there is a parentheses around the B and the L. Gambling, well, we're going to cover it all here tonight. So just a moment, I just want to take a moment to tell you about the Historical Society for those of you who are not familiar with it. We are a nonprofit that covers the entire Ninth Circuit, and just a reminder for folks what the Ninth Circuit is, in case you have forgotten, it is the largest circuit in our federal court system. We have California, Oregon, Washington, Arizona, Nevada, Idaho, Montana, Alaska, Hawaii, Guam, and the Northern Mariana Islands. So we are a huge circuit, and the mission of our society is to enlighten people about the interesting legal history of the Ninth Circuit, and also to amplify the importance of an independent judiciary. We do three things. One of them is engaging panels like this. Another one is we have a law journal, the Western Legal History Law Journal. More about that in just one second. And then we do oral histories of judges and prominent attorneys within the circuit. And I invite you to go to www.njchs.org to check us out. We would love for you to become a member and to be engaged in everything that we do. So the genesis of this panel, as I think you will hear more about, is actually the last issue of the Historical Society's journal, Western Legal History. It was a big double issue that came out in May, I believe, maybe June. And the title of it was just Gambling, with that same parenthetical in there. Our special guest editor for the issue is our moderator tonight, Professor Becky Harris. And our editor-in-chief of the journal, Senior Circuit Judge for the Ninth Circuit, Michael Daly Hawkins, especially asked Becky, based on her extraordinary background and expertise, to be the guest editor for this issue. And she just, as won't surprise you, hit it out of the park. It's a huge double issue. It's gotten a lot of interest. And we are so pleased that our three panelists, who will be introduced by Becky, all wrote articles for that issue. So thank you so very much. I'm going to take a moment to introduce our moderator, Becky Harris, who will be then introducing our panelists, and we're in for a very interesting discussion tonight right now. So Becky, Professor Harris, is a distinguished fellow in gaming and leadership here at the Boyd School of Law, and she is also an alumna of this school with an LLM in gaming and regulation. She has many interesting things in her CV. I cannot go over all of them. It would take the entire time, but a couple particular ones. One, she served in state government in the legislature here in Nevada for 2 terms as a state senator, which truly I think gives an entirely different perspective on policy, having served as a policy maker for this very interesting state. She also was the chair of the Nevada Gaming Control Board. She was the first woman to serve in that position. And while she was in that position, she tackled some extremely challenging, let's say, and difficult issues related to gaming law and the gaming industry, including workplace sexual harassment, the legalization of recreational cannabis and how it interacts with the regulation of gaming, and the strong emergence of sports betting. So she has quite a perspective on many of the things that we are going to be talking about tonight. Professor Harris is sought after around the world to speak on issues related to the broad world of gaming. And so we are particularly honored that she is taking the time here in her home school to moderate this panel. We know that her expertise, in addition to that of the panelists, will provide a real education. And for myself, I've never taken a gaming law class. I am looking forward to learning tonight. So Professor Harris, let me welcome you here to take it away.
Thank you, Joanna. Good evening and welcome to everybody, both who are in person and who are online tonight. Whether this is your first academic discussion of gaming, and yes, I did say academic discussion of gaming or gambling, or you're a long-time industry veteran, I hope you'll learn something tonight. I have an expert panel who are phenomenal. Their credentials are every bit as good as mine, and you are in for a real treat. I want to give you some background in terms of legalized gambling before we go ahead and get into our questions tonight. I think it's important as a country and as professionals, we understand that legal regulated gambling is no longer banished to a sparsely populated section of the United States, i.e. Nevada. It is not a fad. And it is not in decline. In fact, gaming industry continues to grow exponentially, and it seems like every year we meet new benchmarks, and it's our best, highest, most economic grossing year that we have yet. Indeed, as lawmakers begin to look for solutions to backfill their budgets and deal with the challenging economic times, they are starting to turn to gambling as a way to fund their general fund accounts. They're looking to legalize sports betting or expand existing operations, including allowing for online gambling. I think that that is an emerging trend that we'll see over the next 3 to 5 years as more and more jurisdictions begin to embrace gambling. According to an annual Gallup poll on morally acceptable behaviors, 71% of Americans find gambling morally acceptable. So it's no longer the backroom bookie in a velveteen sweatsuit and gold chains and lots of hair, right? It's the bookmaker in the college dorm room that's taking action on the game, or the legalized regulated sports book. And I know we'll hear more from Jordan on that later today. With such a high acceptance by the American people, the barriers for politicians to overcome in terms of selling gambling to their constituents is much lower. In fact, it's almost inconsequential. We are here to discuss, as was previously noted, the most recent journal of the Ninth Judicial Circuit Court Historical Society Western Legal History. That is a lot of words, entitled Gambling. It's kind of interesting because both terms gaming and gambling are often used to refer to games of chance. And now with the rise of esports, we have even more confusion into what gaming actually is. To be clear, gaming or gambling involves the risk of consideration, usually money, on an uncertain outcome for the chance to win something. More succinctly, when the three elements of chance, prize, and consideration are combined, the result is a game of chance. And we call that gaming. So that is not esports, unless you're wagering on esports. And then it's gaming, right? Those that defend the term gambling argue that gaming is simply a euphemism, a chance to disassociate an activity from gambling, thereby making it more socially acceptable. Even as a strategic plan by the gaming industry, perhaps, to call gambling something other than what it is. However, when you do a deep dive, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, gaming has a longer history of referring to gambling than gambling does. According to James Philip Quinn and Thomas L. Clark, while some people assume the word gaming was created as a way to reinvent the casino industry, history tells a different story. The word gaming, defined as the action or habit of playing at games of chance or stakes, actually dates back to 1510, predating the use of the word gambling by 265 years. Okay, kind of interesting. The words gambler, gambling, and gamble were all considered slang when they came into primary use in the 18th century, implying that the activity involved unduly high stakes. So clarity is not going to come anytime soon. It seems the best we can do is accept that games of chance can be referred to as gambling or gaming, depending on the perspectives of the stakeholder. I'll be using the term gaming tonight to refer to gambling, just so we're clear. I'll let the speakers decide which term they prefer. To further muddy the waters, as if it wasn't already muddy enough, the term gaming is even less clear when you have to differentiate between skill-based games, social games, and esports, each of which, in addition to games of chance, bears the moniker of gaming. So tonight we're going to hear from our three expert panelists, and they're going to deal with emerging issues in the gaming world. They have each authored an article in our fabulous gambling journal, and I can't wait to hear about them, hear about what they have to say tonight. So let me introduce the panel. So we're going to start in perfect order. Rihanna Durrett. She is the executive director of the Nevada Dispensary Association, where she transformed the association into the primary regulatory and government affairs voice for Nevada's cannabis industry. You might be scratching your head and wondering how cannabis and gaming are even related. By the end of tonight, you will know. The association has become the primary resource for best practices in the cannabis industry. Appointed to Nevada's Cannabis Compliance Board, she served as its vice chair. She is the newly appointed director of the of the University of Nevada, Las Vegas Cannabis Compliance Board. And her article describes policy decisions that shaped the creation of Nevada's Cannabis Control Board as Nevada established a robust regulatory structure based on its success in regulated gambling. A little bit of a spoiler alert. Next is Jordan Hollander. He serves as Deputy Attorney General for the New Jersey Division of Gaming Enforcement, and he is responsible for casino and employee licensing. He coordinates licensing application investigations in the casino and sports wagering industries and prosecutes violations of the New Jersey Casino Control Act. Mr. Hollander focused his article on federal gaming law in the context of online gaming and legal regulated sports betting. And I'm sure he's got a lot of insights for us tonight. Last but not least is Sarah Partita. She is an expert in data privacy law, government affairs, and public policy. She is an experienced corporate counsel currently working in the gaming industry, where her work centers on data privacy issues. Ms. Partita's article discusses technological innovation from 1891 to the present. She explores the necessity of regulatory innovation to address new technologies and concludes her insightful article with some thoughts on what the future holds. She won't say it, forgive me for saying it. When we had the cyber meltdown in Nevada casinos that was widely publicized nationwide, Ms. Partita had the distinction of having her company that she represents not be one of those companies that experienced such distress. Let's get to the panelists, because you didn't come here to listen to me. So this is for each of the panelists, and feel free to ask your questions as they arise. That is my preference as an educator. I think the question you have on your mind is more important than anything anybody else has to say. And I don't want you so focused on wondering how you're going to ask your question or when you're going to ask your question that you're disengaged from the rest of the content. So we will have some time at the end for questions, but please feel free. We're informal. Raise your hand and ask your questions as they occur. So for each of you, based on your article for the journal, can you provide for us a little bit of context for where we've been, where we are now in terms of the intersection between gambling and your particular expertise? And I'm going to leave it to you all to decide which order you'd like to go in.
Thank you, Becky. First, I want to say thank you. I'm happy to be back on campus. It's my first time being back since I graduated from the LLM program in 2016. I was in class with Becky. And I also need to say, I'm here in my personal capacity, so anything I say is my own personal opinion, not necessarily that of the state of New Jersey, the governor, the Attorney General, or the Department of Law and Public Safety, or the Division of Gaming Enforcement. And I say that in all seriousness, but also my mom is here, who is the state ethics training officer, which I didn't hear. So I wrote on a brief history, a lot of history that could be covered, a whole volume on it of online gaming law in the United States. Gaming law is mostly state focused, based on state statutes, but there are federal laws. Pre-2013, we really only had brick and mortar retail casinos in the United States. We had online gaming, online poker, but not legal, right? It was offshore. And most of that was due to a federal law called the Wire Act. There was a long running dispute over whether the Wire Act covered interstate sports bets or interstate sports bets and contests, including things like online gaming. There was a legal opinion written by the Office of Legal Counsel in the Obama administration that limited it to sports betting. That was reversed by first Trump administration, which then later got reversed again by the First Circuit. So we hopefully, knock on wood, that is a mostly settled issue. Because that and a few other laws like the Unlawful Internet Gaming Enforcement Act really impeded what otherwise would have been a larger, more quick growth of online gaming in the United States. There's a lot more that goes into that. Read my article. Like I said, I could spend a whole hour talking about that. But as we've seen, we have online gaming and like the gaming and gambling debate. There's different states mean different things in this internet gaming, online gaming. Nevada calls it interactive gaming, or there's something different called interactive gaming in Nevada. But it's about 7 or 8 states right now. Rhode Island was the most recent to authorize it. But talking about sports betting with the fall of the Professional Amateur Sports Protection Act of 2018. We have many states have online sports wagering. Missouri just last week was the only state in the country where it was really up for legalization this year. They narrowly passed it by I think 2,000 votes to authorize sports betting in Missouri. So up to about 39 states plus the District of Columbia that have sports betting. So it's been a tremendous growth since 2018. And there's still, we've come to the point where the states that don't have it, there's a lot of local issues of why not. California, really the tribal interest. Texas is just generally anti-gambling sentiment in the state. Big population centers, people want to gamble, but we'll see if they can get it. The tribes seem to be organizing now in California in favor of it, so we'll see what happens there.
Thank you. I have a question I'm dying to ask you.
Sure.
So with the recent election, do you think there's any danger of having yet another reversal in the Wire Act?
That's a great question. I think with the First Circuit precedent now, I'm hopeful that the Office of Legal Counsel won't readdress the question. I think there were some leaders in the gaming industry that were anti-online gaming that aren't here anymore. So I'm not sure if that same pressure will be there. I think having the First Circuit affirm really strongly say Wire Act only applies to sports betting. And if you're a legal nerd like I am, you can read the opinion. It's really like about the placement of commas in a statute that was written in the 60s for anti-organized crime, horse betting cartels really. And applying a 1963 law to the internet is a little strange, but that's where we are. But I think the First Circuit opinion seems pretty solid.
Great, thank you.
I'll go next, but I do have to say applying 1963 laws to the internet is my entire world right now. So as Becky said, Sarah Partita, and my article really focused on just where we started, where we've come within the technology sector and how that crosses over with gaming, and referencing the unfortunate incidents of a year ago. I will say that anyone in this industry who thinks that your company won't be next or can't be next is just fooling themselves, because what used to be very in-person, hands-on technology, again, in the article, I talk about starting with the mechanical slot machines where you physically pulled an arm and it was mechanical reels, to now a truly integrated online casino. So somebody getting into, for example, your Microsoft Azure environment can suddenly take down a casino floor. The evolution of what that has brought to the casino industry, both in how we operate our physical properties as well as what that has done with the online gaming and sports wagering mobile apps, just the proliferation of that. So what I would say is from the article and how that kind of intersects with my expertise, it's the same as anything else in life. The way that technology is evolving and the speed at which it's doing that is really, I think, presenting some great innovative opportunities for the casino industry, but also some regulatory hurdles that I think regulators need to start thinking a little bit ahead of.
Thank you.
Rihanna Durrett, I'm gonna slightly update that bio. Sorry, I missed that just because I think it's actually relevant to my article. I did work in the industry. I was appointed to serve on our cannabis compliance board. So I'm the vice chair of Nevada's regulatory body over cannabis, and I'm the director of UNLV's Cannabis Policy Institute. My article is on the intersection between cannabis and gaming, and at the time I wrote it, this was even much more relevant because Nevada was kind of going head first towards, we are all in on regulating cannabis as much like gaming as we can. In 2019, the governor issued an executive order that described this new, the executive order created a panel that would discuss how to change the entire regulatory structure. It had these very flattering words about gaming. And then the panel discussed basically why gaming was the right direction. They had most of the panelists who ended up being kind of the leaders of changing this structure were from a gaming background. And then a lot of the presentations were on gaming. And then during that legislative session, the testimony even said, we're going to change our cannabis regulatory structure to be more like gaming. And there had been discussions about that for years prior. They were just, private discussions. But having been in the cannabis industry, I know there were a lot of conversations about wanting to be like gaming and the need to be have strict regulations and be known for integrity and regulations as a way to become successful. So in 2019, the legislature did create a regulatory body, the Cannabis Compliance Board, somewhat modeled after gaming, and I can get into more of those details as we go. It did, like I said, adopt some of the approaches of gaming, but even more relevant now is that there are a lot of actual separations between gaming and cannabis. And so even in 2019, as they said, we're going to regulate like gaming, they put in a 1,500-foot separation between gaming establishments and cannabis establishments. So in some ways, there are these very interesting ways they're overlapping, and then in some ways, they're even further apart than they have been in the past.
All right, let's go on to our next discussion. Nationwide, gaming has had an economic impact of about $329 billion annually. That's pretty significant. The gaming industry is also a significant employer responsible for supporting 1.8 million jobs across the United States. And I think when you think of gaming, you don't often think of the responsibilities to employees, the payment of taxes, and all of the other things that the gaming industry is responsible for. So we've got 46 states that offer legal regulated gambling and casinos. We've already discussed a little bit about the repeal of PASPA and how that has spurred the largest expansion of gaming in the United States to date, with the legal regulated sports wagering that's now available in 39 states, plus DC and Puerto Rico, right? And hopefully more to come in the upcoming legislative sessions that begin in January. So Sarah, this question is for you. How is the rapid expansion of sports betting impacted by technology and cybersecurity?
Well, I'll switch that up a little bit and start by giving Jordan's disclaimer that I'm probably going to say some things that definitely do not reflect my employer stance on these things. I think what has benefited from this proliferation of online sports wagering is that for the first time, we're seeing licensed, registered gaming companies actually looking at technology and cybersecurity in a whole new way. Again, talking about how things used to be so property specific, it was very easy to have on-premises systems and solutions that you as the operator were able to insulate and contain. Now that things are going online and we're having mobile apps that are accessing the same systems, we're having to rethink how we do that. We're having to rethink what that looks like from a security, a technology, and in my world, the privacy. Like what rights and what concerns do the individual customers have that we should be responding to? And as that goes across states, and you now are in multiple states, and they are all doing their own thing, similar to how many now have legalized gambling. We now similarly are seeing 20-some states, all with their own data privacy laws, all with slightly different cybersecurity rules. And so you're now having to layer gaming regulatory requirements on top of more general business requirements in that cybersecurity industry. So it's really produced a lot of technology companies that are gaming focused for the first time. And I think there's pros and cons of that, but it's been interesting to watch.
Brianna, as gambling efforts have increased and we've seen the rollback of the illegal activity in terms of allowing for legal regulated sports betting and online gambling, have you seen a corresponding increase in the legalization of cannabis? Have the release of those stigmas about gambling had any carryover or have any impact on cannabis?
I haven't seen a direct impact on legalization of sports betting, but they are happening in a parallel fashion. So there are definitely lessons for cannabis to be learned from gaming as far as investment, scaling, compliance. But one of the things I think is really interesting about that is the way the federal government went about prohibiting these activities. So PAPSA, the reason it was struck down was because they tried to tell the federal government tried to tell the states what to do, right? And so I think that was really smart to say, oh, we don't need to shut down every bookie. Just tell the state what to do. Then we only have to regulate 50 entities. So it was smart. It didn't work, but it was smart. Similarly with cannabis, to get around co-opting the state's police power and to get around violating the 10th Amendment where the federal government can't tell the states what to police, they entered the Controlled Substances Act through treaties with other international treaties with other countries. So that kind of gave this ability for the federal government to have this police power over the states and kind of infiltrate very common human behaviors. So I think it's really interesting to look at how both of these are these kind of like artificial ways of treating very common human behavior and all the decisions that have to go into that.
Thank you. And Jordan, what lessons are learned or have been learned from the rapid expansion of legal regulated sports wagering?
I think it's clear that it's a popular activity that people wanted. I think this was always one of New Jersey's points in the PASPA litigation, that it was never really a question of whether we should have sports wagering or not. Sports wagering happened. It was going on everywhere. It's going on everywhere now, even in states where it's still not legal. But bringing it out of the shadows and into the light where it's regulated, where there are patron protections, where there's responsible gaming programs, anti-money laundering requirements, KYC requirements, bringing it out of the shadows into the light has been super successful. Regulation works. Not to say that there can't be a problem in a regulated jurisdiction, but you hear in the news when there are sports wagering scandals, like with Shohei Ohtani out in California. Well, what I at least didn't see in a lot of that coverage was that happened in a state where sports wagering is not legal. Not to say that it couldn't happen in a state where there is legal sports wagering, but it may have been caught sooner. But as we've seen this rapid growth, there are some new challenges, a few that have stood out in recent times. One is there's been a movement backed by the NCAA right now to ban wagering on college prop bets, which are, especially in football, are a very popular betting market. Some states have already banned them. Their student athletes have received threats, again, largely coming from jurisdictions where sports wagering is not legal. But that is one issue that we're seeing right now. And advertising. When sports wagering first came into New Jersey, you couldn't walk by a few without seeing a billboard, a train go by with an ad, a radio ad, a TV ad. There's been some federal legislation introduced to prohibit entirely sports wagering or advertising, or limit it to certain hours of the day at night, not during a game, things like that. I'm not sure if that's really the best way to go, but bills are out there. And just always keeping responsible gaming efforts. Those considerations are always important. As more places have sports wagering legalized, there are more people gambling, actually more problem gamblers. So this responsible gaming is always a consideration to keep on the forefront.
So listening to your comments, it sounds to me like you feel that there are more protections in a legal regulated environment as opposed to an environment where there is no access to any kind of regulatory structure or any oversight by the government. Can you just elaborate for a minute on that?
Absolutely. So in a legal regulated market, there are player protections. Obviously, the operators that offer the games, you have to go through a licensing background check, a licensing process in order to operate, so you know the people you're dealing with are operating in a fair manner. If there is a dispute, there is a process that you can go through. You can file a patron dispute claim. Either sometimes there's programs through operators. If that doesn't work, you can go through the regulator of the jurisdiction. If you have a problem with your bookie around the corner, not really any way you can go to. So having that out in the light, I think it's beneficial for the patron.
Thank you. So cashless wagering has been a big buzzword in Nevada since one of its most recent casino openings. It seems to be the latest differentiator in the gambling world. Sarah points out in her article that the first cashless systems were in fact introduced in the early 1990s. They're more commonly known as TITO, or ticket in, ticket out systems, for use with regard to slot machines, and patrons were able to move seamlessly from one machine to the next. Additional benefits included the elimination of significant overhead, labor costs, wear and tear on the machines, and other things. Cashless wagering refers to the use of digital payment methods within a casino environment. Players can load cash into a cashless wagering account using mobile apps, prepaid cards, or electronic wallets, and then transfer funds between slot machines or between a casino's sister properties. And it used to be that your wagering wallet only allowed for you to utilize your funds on wagering products, but the Nevada Gaming Control Board and the Nevada Gaming Commission are working on getting our casino environment one step closer for patrons to be able to kind of use that account wagering wallet for nonstop shopping in terms of gambling, restaurants, other types of retail uses. So, Sarah, I want to start with you. How has cashless wagering transformed the gaming industry? And do you think digital payments are going to change the form or the way in which patrons gamble? And what are some of the challenges, if any, that are associated with digital payment?
Wow, you're just gonna go out.
I'm just going for it.
Go for it. I think yes, it has transformed the industry, right? It's definitely allowing individuals to come without having to bring cash on hand. We saw early on in the online poker, when Nevada passed interactive gaming, that there were actually a lot of issues because the federal government was not allowing banks to allow wire transfers for gaming purposes. There was a lot of restrictions on how money could be transferred, where it could go. So you saw a lot of cash, you saw a lot of I'll call them workarounds to figure out how to get, in a truly online world where you can't give somebody cash, how do you get that money into these accounts? So you started to see, again, with the evolution of technology, the industry rise up to meet that challenge. So in the early 90s, yeah, it was probably convenience. It was more about labor, wear and tear on machines. But then as the internet became more and more popular, and as you continue to see what we have now with sports wagering, cashless is the only option in a lot of gaming opportunities. So I think that what you're going to start seeing is some AML, some KYC, all of these things that, again, you used to say, okay, you know, John Doe is at the window with X amount of cash. We know who it is, we know how much it is, and we can quickly trace source of funds. I think trying to trace source of funds, especially won't even get into it as you start to see some of the casinos wanting to introduce the ability to accept crypto. I think you're really seeing where maybe some of our regulation and some of the regulated manufacturers are not quite to where technology has pushed it.
Yeah, it's my understanding that only Wyoming has officially legalized the use of crypto in gaming.
Yes, but there are other properties that are starting to have like crypto ATMs on or adjacent to the casino floor, which makes it very easy to take crypto and convert it to cash. But again, I think that gives you at least one more layer of protection. But I do think that that's something that we're gonna start to see being pushed more.
Thanks. Rihanna, marijuana is not a banked business. So maybe there are some parallels between the cannabis industry and gaming. I'm wondering, how does the cannabis industry benefit from technology? Are there any limitations on the use of technology, like payment options or otherwise, that face the cannabis industry today?
So, many cannabis establishments do use banks, and they're openly, legally using mostly credit unions, not major banks, but credit unions have been willing to bank because FinCEN released guidance saying if you're going to bank the cannabis industry, here's how you do it, and they accepted that as a kind of sanctioning or acceptance of banking cannabis. It's expensive for them and it's expensive for the industry because there is such rigorous compliance. So there is some banking. There's also every year in Congress, there's this Safer Banking Act introduced that would fully release banks from any liability for banking. So that would be really great for the industry if they were able to if banking allowed to fully go forward. One thing that's I think interesting about that is that it says that financial institutions couldn't be disciplined for banking cannabis businesses, and then financial institutions includes gaming. So that would actually bring gaming and cannabis maybe a step closer. But since there isn't prolific banking or complete banking, there are a lot of tech companies coming up with ways to move money around. A lot of big companies have been brought down because somewhere in that chain there's money laundering involved. And you'd be surprised how easy how easy you fall into, oh, I'll do this, and then I won't get into, oh wait, no, that's money laundering. So I have the very smart, ethical people have accidentally come up with great money laundering schemes. They didn't go through with it, but and then the last thing I'd say about that is an interesting development in technology in cannabis is these different ways to capture the consumer and races to capture market share throughout the country. And so you see those in ways that you wouldn't expect. Like there was a proposal for a company here that would, this happened in California. The vehicles would roam around carrying product on them. And then, so they would become like mobile retailers and then they would capture the consumer that way. There's proposals to do vending machines, and I imagine those would be mostly run by tech companies where they just want really the consumer's info and to be able to sell them cannabis. So I think that's an interesting thing to watch for.
Sarah, looks like you had a reaction. Do you have any thoughts around that?
Thoughts around that I'm sharing right now.
Was actually one of Senator Harris's colleagues, I will not name the colleague, who said, we could do this like cleaning company and then the money would go transfer through there, like an actual cleaning company.
Right, Jordan, in your article, you point out the 6 US states currently legalize online casinos. 28 states plus the District of Columbia offer online mobile sports betting, and 40 states allow for online advanced deposit wagering on parimutuel horse racing. And a few states, including Nevada, allow for online poker. Online gambling, by its very nature, is cashless wagering. How is cashless wagering different from currency-based wagering? And are there any unique regulatory challenges associated with cashless wagering?
So how it's different, I think, is probably what you think it is. Don't carry your wallet with you. You don't have chips. You don't have coins going into the machine. Not that there've been coins going into machines for a while. But I think the D still has some, right? Downtown. I think the biggest challenge, and it's not necessarily a regulatory challenge, it's just getting people to change their behavior. I think the industry felt that when they went from coin and slot machines to ticket in, ticket out vouchers. And I think some people were resistant to that at first, but then you get used to it and you move on. But I think there's going to be some of that hesitation in this as well. I can say even though I'm a regulator, I'm also a gambler. I like sitting at a table with chips. I don't think I would like playing blackjack or craps as much with a digital wallet and not actually. So I think you feel something when you put the money in front of you. It's a lot easier to just keep hitting a button, not necessarily seeing the money going down. Hopefully you win. But I think that there's going to need to be a culture shift in just gambling behavior for there to be, but with the widespread use of online sports wagering and having ADW for horse wagering, people have a way to get used to it. There's an entry point to it, and I think chips will probably be going away, not in the near future, but soonish enough. But with that, there are some challenges. There's also some benefits. I think Sarah got into this a little bit. To have a cashless wagering account, you need to give your information. You need to prove who you are, prove your source of funds. It makes it easier on the back end for the casinos for the source of funds investigations, the KYC and AML requirements. And having those cashless wagering options can also help in responsible gaming programs. People can set deposit limits, play limits. They can have cooling off periods. They can self-exclude if they want to by clicking a button online. But there's also, the data privacy concerns, which Sarah can probably talk a lot more about than I can. New Jersey is one of those states that just adopted a data privacy law. I think it went into effect on Halloween. So that will be a big shift for a lot of companies that now have all these requirements that they didn't have before to get ready for. And the last thing I'll say on this is that from a regulatory perspective, because this is a technology being introduced into the gaming system, it has to go through testing and approval. Like any other system that goes under a gaming form, the games, from the shufflers, the Tito vouchers, Tito systems, and the vouchers, all of those payment systems have to be submitted for approval through regulatory agencies.
Okay. So as everybody in the world knows or should know, it is necessary that there is a robust gambling regulatory structure in place to oversee gambling operations. In fact, in 1977, when New Jersey had just announced that they had legalized casinos, the Nevada legislature saw fit to put a strict standard into its legislative statutory structure. So it's always been interesting to me that legislative policy or opinion is captured in our state statutes with regard to the regulation of gaming, and the strict standard was established. Many jurisdictions around the world have adopted this standard. I define regulatory integrity as having the right types of guidelines, regulations, and policies in place, coupled with transparent accountability mechanisms. So the ideal is really to have the right types of mechanisms in place that allow regulators to judge and address challenges as they come, and the behavior of those they regulate. I talk an awful lot in my law classes about smart regulation versus strict regulation, and how smart regulation can be strict regulation, but instead of just being strict regulation, it can be smart. So what does regulatory integrity look like from each of your perspectives? And I'll let you decide who wants to go first.
I'm happy to go first as the regulator. In New Jersey, we have the Casino Control Act, which I think has 220 something subsections, and then within those hundreds of subsections or thousands of further subsections, we have the Sports Wagering Act, 24 chapters of regulations. So there's a lot there. And I think, if you go into the Casino Control Act, Section 1 is the public policy, similar to what Becky was just describing for Nevada. And there's 20 or so subsections about the importance of the gaming industry for New Jersey for various number of reasons. But the one that I always like to go back to when I need to cite this for some purpose, I think it's NJSA 5:12-1B6, if anyone ever needs to know that, is that the Division of Gaming Enforcement is there to help for the public to maintain the public's trust in the operations of the gaming industry. But in New Jersey, and I'm sure there's other states that do this as well, but in New Jersey, it goes one step further. It's to maintain the public's trust in the operations of gaming and also in the regulation thereof. So that onus is on us as regulators as well, that we need to, when we say strict regulation, it's strict regulation of the regulated community, but also as us on regulators, we have that duty to, because as regulators, we wield great power, but we need to wield it justly in a good way. We're not there just there to bring the hammer down when something bad happens. And I say this when I'm dealing with people who apply for a qualification or casino key employee license in New Jersey. In order to work for gaming enforcement, I had to fill out that same multi-jurisdictional personal history disclosure form, go through the same background investigation. Yeah, it's a long form.
65 pages plus supplements based on the jurisdiction, just for those of you who may not be familiar with the gaming licensing process.
So I've sat through that process, so when I'm telling someone why we need a piece of information, I've gone through that process, and I think that's helpful, because it's an intrusive process, it really is.
All right, Sarah, what does regulatory integrity look like from where you sit?
I'll take this from just specifically like that privacy piece. I think that the regulatory integrity is going to be about ensuring that the public continues to trust in the operators, right? After some of the large headlines that we've had, is that going to affect public trust, right? They're giving us their data, they're giving us their time, their money, and we want to continue to be the place for entertainment and assure the public that they have a place to come that is going to be trustworthy and be able to take what they're giving us. So I think for me, the regulatory integrity would really mean that some of these regulators should be taking a look at what information is being collected, how is it being used, and what are they doing with it. One of the supplemental pieces that was provided to those of you who are signed up for this was just 2 quick articles from some law firms about first the Nevada and the Massachusetts. And while I realize Massachusetts is not in this jurisdiction, Massachusetts really took an interesting privacy-specific approach and combined privacy, responsible gaming, and cybersecurity, kind of frankly muddled it a little bit into one ball, but I think the principles there that they were trying to get at are things that we as an industry and the regulators should really be thinking about as we move with cashless wagering and all these other integrated systems.
Mariana?
So I mentioned back in 2019, when there was this effort to emulate gaming, the preamble from gaming was actually almost cut and paste into cannabis, into the chapter regulating cannabis. And it really just, there were some minor revisions. Over the course of the next few years, fortunately, policymakers and regulators started to realize that really doesn't make sense, because gaming is this industry where you can make a lot more money in gaming than you can in cannabis. And so the expense to go through that regulatory compliance is a much different playing field. And so in 2023, there was a kind of a backing off of regulating like gaming a little bit. There were some bills that passed that kind of took a step back they reduced the penalties on the establishments. There was this idea that we have to be strict like gaming. There were huge fines. And there's just this fine factory coming out of the board that I'm on. I'm also a regulator. I'm the vice chair of the board, and I was at the time I was pretty vocal about being too punitive towards the legal industry when another reason that it's really not similar to gaming is the brick and mortar illegal market that they have to compete with. So anyway, there was kind of a backing off of regulating like gaming, and so I think for cannabis regulating with integrity really needs to take into account a balance between the business needs and why we regulated, which was to be able to collect the tax revenue. There has to be a balance between that and consumer safety. And consumer safety is probably a bigger issue in cannabis than gaming because people can get sick if the product is moldy. So there has to be a balance. And one other thing I'll say is that I think we moved in a positive direction by taking a step back from regulating like gaming a bit. It's still somewhat similar, and I'd like to keep it there. I don't want us to go back towards that effort to become more and more strict and more prescriptive. I'd like for us to let the cannabis industry grow, have a little more flexibility, and not bog ourselves down with the level of regulation there is in
So
gaming.
pun was absolutely intended with the industry growing.
Always.
Is the standard from the state policymakers a strict standard in cannabis, like it is in gaming, or is it a different standard?
So that's really what the policymakers have kind of grappled with. In 2019, it was meant to be as strict as possible. There was a news article that came out saying, I don't think there's been enough prosecution against the legal industry. So there wasn't an effort to really wrap their hands around compliance around the legal industry. And then everyone saw, well, this isn't really, the cannabis industry doesn't make the kind of money that gaming does, and this can put people out of business. So got to take a step back and have more balance there.
Thank you. So as Rihanna has described and some of the other panelists have mentioned, that articulated standard of strict regulation can really be unwieldy, and it can sometimes create unintended barriers. So we've talked a little bit about what regulatory integrity looks like from each of their unique perspectives. I think we've talked a little bit about smart versus strict regulation. I described smart regulation as being visionary. I think it's adaptive to new situations, and it includes a healthy dose of common sense, sometimes which is missed. And I think some of the articles contained in this journal illustrate some of the absurdities of strict regulation, while some show the application of smart regulation. So I would like for each of the panelists to maybe give us an example of what you consider to be smart regulation, which is visionary, but also holds licensees and those that are regulated to a strict standard so that they know what that standard is and what they have to comply with, but that it's not unwieldy.
Sure. So New Jersey is unique in that we still have an in-house state testing lab for any and all games and software that go onto the casino floor. And within that testing lab, we have what's called the New Jersey First Submission Program. So in an effort to get the newest games out quicker for patrons, and in a very competitive market, there is a program for companies if they bring a new game to New Jersey, submit it to our lab for testing first. There is a priority placed on it, and it can go on to field testing within 14 days. So it's getting newer games out to patrons quicker as opposed to if they went through the normal testing process. I will also add that Chapter 69C of our regulations, because I spent the last year going through them, is currently out for comment right now, that we are in the midst of updating, clarifying, and modernizing those regulations, because they actually haven't been updated since the advent of either online gaming or sports wagering in a larger scale. There's been smaller changes made in the interim period, where there has been no large scale updating to our regulations since 2013, basically. So I think that's also an example of smart regulations are there to provide guidance, but they also need to be updated to keep up with the times. If anyone's interested in looking at them, comment period is open until January 3rd.
Interesting that Jordan said the independent testing labs, because that's what I was thinking of as a great example of smart regulation. It was taking what used to be, especially in Nevada, very closed process, and the technology division was responsible for that. I think that if anyone hasn't gone and seen what these testing labs do or been introduced to them, I would highly suggest you do that, because what they're able to do is take more specialized technologists and look at games and systems that are more specific to what their expertise is. And so I think it really opened up, and especially as we continue to move into more and more technology forward product, I think that it's a win for the industry and a win for patrons.
Well, I think even though it can get pretty time consuming and feel like it's going nowhere, I think a lot of meetings, a lot of open discussion, a lot of collaboration between the regulators, the policymakers, and the industry, I think that's been successful for Nevada. When adult use was legalized, there was a task force where there were like 60 meetings involving people from all stakeholder groups, law enforcement, youth prevention, health department, tax department. Everybody was involved, and again, a lot of the times it feels like we're having meeting after meeting, but I think they are necessary to really work together. I think smart regulation is regulators working with the regulated to find mutual solutions that work for both.
So you're saying, in a sense, then, that smart regulation is collaborative.
Exactly.
Jordan, Nevada was the first jurisdiction to legalize online gambling. As you mentioned earlier, we call it interactive gaming, and it has been legal since 2001. Mobile sports betting has been incredibly popular. However, online casino gambling has not enjoyed that same success. By my count, 7 states have legalized online casino gaming, while only 6 states actually offer online casino. Nevada is the outlier. It participates in poker only in the multi-state liquidity agreement. Why do you think online sports betting has grown so quickly while online casino gaming has had almost 25 years to develop and hasn't really taken off? And just as a little nuance to that question, in talking to my regulator friends in jurisdictions where they have both sports betting and online wagering, the return to the general fund in terms of taxes is 75% higher for online casino.
Absolutely.
And if you're going to backfill a budget, it only seems to make fiscal sense that you would choose online over sports, but the reverse is true.
Right.
Can you walk us through that?
It's a great question, and it's something I think a lot of people are confused by. I think if you would have guessed in 2018 which one would have grown faster, most people would have said iGaming, online casino. And it's, like you said, it's really where the money is, for states looking for revenue, especially as we're coming out of the pandemic, extra funding no longer being there for state budgets. There was a lot of thought that last year was going to be the year that jurisdictions across the country, Illinois, New York, Minnesota, were going to legalize online gaming. It didn't happen. Rhode Island was the only state last year, and that is sort of, it's hard to compare the setup in Rhode Island to other states because it's basically a monopoly for Bally's Corporation. There are 2 casinos in Rhode Island. And it's a conundrum. It really is. I think there's a lot of, as I was mentioned earlier, a lot of uncertainty after the Black Friday prosecutions in the poker world in 2011, I want to say. That scared off a lot of people for a while. Then the uncertainty with the Wire Act, whether online gaming would be even feasible under federal law. But since that's basically been settled, since the First Circuit opinion, but there really hasn't been that push that people expected. It is a little confounding. I think with sports wagering, like I said, it was happening everywhere anyway, so it was easier to sell to people. More on that patron protection, bringing this activity into the light. There's a lot of jurisdiction-specific issues as well. In many states, sports wagering was an easy sell to help racetracks in particular, or in some states, tribal casinos. Whereas in some states, both those interests are an impediment to getting online gaming. California, I mentioned earlier, though it's really more sports wagering. Minnesota has been the tribal and racetrack interests have been on the opposite sides of the issue. But whether they can work through those things, I don't know. New York seems to have a bill pending every year that's on the cusp of passage, but then it doesn't happen. Though I think they spent some of the money that they anticipated getting from iGaming one year once. So they'll eventually, I think they'll get there. But the big concern with online gaming, and there's studies, of course, you can find a study showing basically what you want it to show. There's a concern for cannibalization of the market. And I think post-pandemic, you've seen that a little bit in states that have online gaming, that people are just gambling on their phones instead of going to the local casino. That's the big specter out there. The extent of how much it is an issue is really jurisdiction specific, and there's some people who say there's no cannibalization. Some people think cannibalizations are going to be the end of casinos in like 5 years. It's hard to find a middle there.
Okay, thanks. Sarah, what insights can you give us about the development of online interactive gaming and its slow adoption from a technology perspective?
Jordan called it a conundrum, and that's all I can say on the topic. Honestly, I think that if anyone studies that and can figure it out, we'd all be interested in the answers.
Okay. Perfect. Brianna, your article explains that the Cannabis Compliance Board was modeled after the Nevada Gaming Control Board. You've mentioned that in your remarks tonight. Can you explain which other models, if any, were considered, and ultimately what made the Nevada Gaming Control Board the best model for regulating cannabis?
Yeah, so it's kind of an amalgamation, and it went through several versions, and so there's kind of legacy pieces of it from those previous versions. It started out taking a lot of notes out of Arizona's kind of like pharmacy model playbook. That's why we have a dispensary centered industry in Nevada. So a lot of the medical marijuana days are still seen in Nevada's system. Then it was regulated by our health department. And so a focus at that time kind of became like environmental health conditions, testing of the product, hygiene, kind of trying to impose what the FDA would potentially impose. Then it went to our Department of Taxation, so that was considered a little more business friendly, but due to some massive licensing litigation, it was then it came under the Cannabis Compliance Board, which is somewhat similar to the Gaming Control Board in that there is this 5-member board. It's kind of like if you put the Gaming Commission and the Gaming Control Board into one board. We can, on the board, adopt regulations, issue discipline, issue licenses if there were licenses to give. I know the kind of architect of this system, who was an AG in the gaming world for a long time. Really liked how we do it in Nevada, but also liked how Massachusetts had set up their cannabis regulatory commission. I'm not sure why, because they really weren't any further ahead in regulating than we were. And then they had some major missteps after that. So I don't really, I wouldn't say they're the one that we should be modeled after. So we, so it's a hybrid of all of those really. And for the reasons I said, I think it's good that we're kind of taking a step away from trying to be like gaming, but really taking some lessons from gaming learned seriously.
Okay, thank you. So be thinking of your questions, because we're at the last question for the panelists, and then hopefully, even though you've not raised your hands tonight, you'll have a burning question you have to have answered, because you may not appreciate the level of expertise that you have literally at your fingertips. So last question, are there any issues that are just beginning to form on your horizon? In other words, what's next? And we'll start with Jordan.
So I have AI written down here, and just a coincidence that Sarah has the same thing written down. AI, I think, is going to revolutionize gaming. I moderated a panel on this at the North American Gaming Regulators Association earlier this year, and I'm by no means a tech expert, but I learned a lot at that panel. There's so many possible uses for AI. Particularly in the responsible gaming space, there's early interventions that can happen. They can detect patterns that will enable operators to reach out to patrons with information about gaming, responsible gaming programs, and that might be available in New Jersey. We actually require the online operators to incorporate AI into their platforms. And there's certain intervention points that they must either reach out with a phone call, then reach out with a letter, maybe even suspend play. There's different stages, there's different triggering events for each of those steps. Obviously, while there are benefits, there's also the risk of data privacy. We've talked a lot, and the risk for abuse. Again, there's a pending federal bill that would actually ban the use of AI in gaming, which I think probably puts the cart before the horse, because AI can be such a positive, especially with responsible gaming. I'm not sure where that bill stands right now, but that is out there. There's always that sort of, will the federal government intervene? But we'll see.
Sarah?
Sure, Jordan cheated and took my notes. AI, I think we're seeing that anywhere that technology is being used, we're hearing words that to some extent are artificial intelligence. We can have a whole conversation on whether some of this is actually AI, whether it's machine learning, whether it's other types of technology that may or may not be what we think of as that true generative AI. But I think that as that comes forward, you're introducing yet another place where, data privacy is going to start to come into effect. What I think a lot of operators and frankly regulators haven't thought about either is, if the data is not clean before you apply AI to it, then the output is meaningless. So while people want to use AI to try to do responsible gaming, to do, business intelligence, business analytics, I think that's all great and fine, but just understanding information governance and what data in and data out looks like. I think that until data is clean, until people have consented to some of these uses, I think that what you're getting may not be as accurate and foolproof as you expected it to be. So I think that it is on the horizon, but I think that there's a lot of work that has to be done before AI is really a useful tool that we all envision it to be.
Yeah.
Okay, so my favorite question. These are some things in cannabis that could be completely different a few years from now. The entire industry could look completely different. You've probably all heard that right now the federal government is undergoing rescheduling cannabis to Schedule 3. The main impact that would have is it would remove a tax penalty that's imposed on the industry right now, where they can't take standard business deductions. So it would make the industry a lot more healthy and viable, and it would reduce the barriers to conducting research. So that's pretty exciting. It's not that big of a change, but if it was eventually descheduled or legalized, then interstate commerce would be legal. And then you'd see a whole different industry. We probably wouldn't grow in Nevada anymore. You'd have import states, you'd have export states, everything would be different. I have 3, so I'll go through the other 2 quickly. Interesting conversations are forming around cannabis and gaming legally converging. For example, there's cannabis delivery is prohibited on the entire Strip corridor. So there is discussion, very minimal and maybe not a lot of it, but about what would it look like if delivery was allowed to the Strip corridor. And the interest in that, I think, is supplanting current illegal market sales. And I think, and one of the arguments for it would be that, well, if it's delivery to the non-gaming establishments, then it's not putting the gaming establishments in trouble. But I'm sure the gaming establishments there have a lot to say about that. So, so you'd have to ask them about their opinions about that. And then the last one that is really interesting is intoxicating hemp. So intoxicating hemp is like this undercover cannabis that is proliferating throughout the country, where it gets people high, has psychoactive properties just like cannabis. It was accidentally not really legalized through the 2018 Farm Bill, but it created some gray area that is being exploited by hemp producers, hemp farmers. so even like DoorDash was delivering it and Total Wine and More would deliver it to your doorstep. Minnesota has legalized intoxicating hemp beverages. Texas has intoxicating hemp proliferated throughout the state. So it's like this sleeper drug that came on through and kind of is you're gonna see some like hemp versus cannabis issues really needing to be figured out.
Excellent, thank you. All right, I know there are at least a handful of people in this room that have a question for the panel. Yes, my students, I'm staring at you. Why don't we go ahead and get into the question phase? Go ahead.
First of all, thank you very much for all this information that you shared with us. It's really interesting, and I have two questions. The first one is for Sarah. You mentioned the AI by the end of the session. So is the AI itself, it's legalized in all the states, or it's not a legalized tool yet?
AI is not illegal in any jurisdiction. I would say the foremost AI governing act that those of us in privacy are really watching and paying attention to right now is the EU AI Act. And it's not really about making it legal or illegal. What you're seeing is regulation that control it. So in AI, you have the developers and the deployers. So they're really regulating on the development side, the data that can be used to develop and the restrictions on development. And then when you're deploying, what are the consumer facing I'll say standards and guidelines that have to be followed in order to deploy safe AI. So it's more about regulating how it's used and not so much about making it.
So officially it's regulated, like it's a regulated tool, or no, not yet?
It's not really regulated in the
It's
US
not.
and there are a few states, and Colorado is coming to mind, that have passed some form of an AI Act. Most of them are currently focused on regulating high risk AI, which would be any type of AI that's using sensitive personal data, so like healthcare data, or that are passing laws, or I'm sorry, using AI in a way that could inhibit your like constitutional rights or legal rights. So that might discriminate based on a protected class or deny, credit or things like that based on discriminatory reasons. So it's really more about that, about how do you use it in a safe and secure manner, as opposed to is the technology itself legal or not legal.
Thank you. And my second question is for Rihanna. Thank you very much for that's give me like curious to go and read your article, the one that you mentioned the whole time. So my main question is, when we study the sports betting, so we have too many examples. Like even like new examples, it doesn't come into my mind. Could you please give us like a simple examples? It's under the canvas itself.
Examples of
You
what?
can mention like a few things, and you can mention these examples for the cannabis. Thank
Sorry,
you.
examples of what? I missed one word and then it threw me off.
For
Examples of
the cannabis,
Uh-huh.
examples like, do you have like any examples you can say it's lie under the cannabis, like the sports betting? We have too many sports, it's under the sports betting. For the cannabis itself, how you can like, if you can give us a
You're just saying like
definition,
the cannabis, what I'm saying is so super broad, you're saying. So I guess maybe I'd point you to, we have state law, NRS, governing it. And then we have state regulation under that. Most states, it was passed through a ballot initiative, adult use or recreational was passed through a ballot initiative. So a lot of states have kind of funky rules in that they put what they had to in the ballot initiative to get it passed, not necessarily what they thought was the best way to regulate. I know in Nevada, when the ballot initiative was to regulate like alcohol, that is kind of smart, but I know they did that because it was testing well. So that probably went too far off track, but I would say check out Nevada state law, Nevada regulations, and then the Controlled Substance Act at the federal level.
okay, thank you.
We have time for about one more question. Do we have one more question? Yeah.
The question will go for all of you. due to the election, there is a discussion, in terms of, the regulation, in different industries in the country. The gaming industry is heavily regulated. And compared to the rest of the world, I would say the gaming industry is heavily regulated in the United States. So you see the regulation in the United States in the gaming industry.
I think because so much of gambling law in the United States is at the state level, that we're unlikely to see a push for deregulation. There may be a push, as we discussed, for smarter regulation, but not necessarily deregulation. There will still always be that strict regulation of gaming to protect the patron. That is not to say that there might not be some policy changes with respect to either AI or sports wagering, like with the potential ad ban or a national ban on college prop wagering. But deregulation, I don't really see much of that. I don't see that happening.
Anybody else wanna?
No, I would agree. I think one of the things that I'm gonna be interested to watch with this outcome is the cryptocurrency. Knowing some of the stances and business interests of this administration in that industry, it could affect policy and availability of cryptocurrency in the US.
What I do think it's interesting that cannabis was a platform for both presidential candidates. When was the last time gaming was a presidential platform to get elected the leader of the free world? So it's a great topic for students to get into. I don't see it being a huge priority under this administration, but I don't think, Trump hasn't expressed that he's very against cannabis legalization. So I think it'll be more of the same for the next, at least probably 5 to 10 years, more of the same, very, very slow incremental change. One thing that I think is really interesting, and I don't even fully understand the implications of it, is how Chevron could impact cannabis, because I just happened to see an article earlier saying that rescheduling could be impacted by it. I don't think so. I don't see how, but there's a lot to be thought about there.
All right, thanks. Can everybody help me extend a big thank you to our panelists?
Well, I have learned a lot and have many things to keep my eyes on. I live in California, so I'm keeping my eyes on whether we, whether sports betting becomes something that we can do in the state. And it's clear that with so much transition in these, both industries that we've really been talking about, gaming and cannabis law, that we could have another panel like this perhaps in 6 months or a year, and there would be all sorts of new things happening. And I appreciated the questions from the audience. Thank you so much. Those were very helpful as well. So I want to say from the Historical Society, thank you so much to our wonderful moderator and speakers. We just have a little thank you gift here to say thank you. A little treat from California here. Let's see. That's right. It is not infused with anything. Yes, I didn't carry anything across state lines. To carry across state lines. Thank you to everybody who has participated virtually. We really appreciate your participation, so that everybody knows this has been streamed, of course, and also recorded, and so will be placed on the Ninth Judicial Circuit Historical Society website and through our YouTube channel, and so you can go back and pick up on anything it is that you missed and that you want to find out about, and follow up with the panelists, I'm sure. For those of you who are here in person, we have a wonderful reception ready for us. You can perhaps smell the delicious food that is awaiting you outside. So let's have one more big round of applause for our moderator. Thank you.